everybody. Thank you all for being here, and thank you to Allison for inviting me to be a part of this. I'm going to be reading a short story that sparked the novel that I'm working on right now that's about a fictional Iranian theme park in Texas called Ayatollah Land. And I guess I've abridged the story, but all you need to know is that Furugh Farrokhzad is one of the most famous modern Iranian poets, and she wrote around the 1950s and 60s, and she died at the age of 32 when her car hit a wall in Tehran. Okay, Ayatollah Land. I had just gotten to Ayatollah Land, the Iran-inspired theme park outside Houston, where I'd been working for the past 3 years. I was waiting by the replica of the Azadi monument to greet visitors as they arrived, when Babak, the 13-year-old pest who was always playing pranks, took the wig off my head and ran away. I pulled off my heels and chased after him, barefoot, all the way down Valiasr Avenue, the main drag, past the miniature high-rises, the police station, the university, and all the little souvenir shops and groceries that had just begun to open. I finally caught up to him near the train station. Babak dangled the wig above the opening of a trash can, moving it slowly downward, then yanking it back up again, taunting me, even though I didn't really care. If he threw it away, I'd just dig it out and smash it into his face later. But his unwarranted confidence irked me, that smug look on his face. He stepped onto the tracks and raised the wig high. When I got closer, I noticed he was holding another short-haired wig in his left hand. Then I saw something from the corner of my eye that made me do a double take. A girl on the platform, wearing my shirt and my corduroy skirt. The girl climbed up onto the train platform and snatched the wig from Babak's left hand, spitting Persian too rapidly for me to understand, except for the curse words. "Who the hell are you?" I interrupted. Ordinarily, I wouldn't be so rude to a stranger, but I felt ambushed. She looked offended. "I work here," she said in English. Her accent sounded thicker than my mom's, and she spoke more carefully, as if she were practicing each word in her head before she said it. "Who the hell are you?" She hesitated a little before saying hell, as if using the word for the first time. "I'm the Furugh Farrokhzad impersonator." I grabbed my wig from Babak's right hand and slid it back on. "That's impossible," the girl said. "I am Furugh. They didn't tell me we worked in shifts." "We don't work in shifts," I said. I saw my own confusion spread across the other Furugh's delicate face. And then it struck me like a car hitting a wall. I had been fired, and the bastards in human resources hadn't even bothered telling me. This is probably how things worked in their country. If you complained, they told you to lighten up. "Aren't Americans supposed to be cheerful?" they would say. "Why don't you smile more?" You could never win. Either you were too American with your love for coffee and personal space and time-stamped punch cards, or you weren't American enough. I left the new girl and Babak without saying goodbye and grabbed my bicycle from the rack near one of the bridges in fake Isfahan. I felt blood pulse inside my ears as I rode from fake Isfahan all the way to fake Qom, where the admin offices were located inside a sprawling fake mosque. I didn't understand this place. Their slogan was "the happiest Iran on earth," with founders who claimed to be secular and nonpartisan and apolitical, a place for wistful, disconnected members of my parents' generation to relive their pre-revolution days. But here they were, setting up offices in Qom, just like the Ayatollahs they'd run away from. I walked into Mohsen's office without acknowledging his bitch secretary Shirin, who was on the phone anyway and didn't even give me a chance to properly ignore her. Mohsen was sitting at his desk reading the Times. A half-eaten cutlet sandwich sat on a plate, coating his whole office in the smell of chicken and potatoes and cumin. "What is it, Ozzy?" Mohsen didn't lower the paper. All I saw were his hands with swirls of black hair on every knuckle, his shiny golden watch. "Did you forget to tell me something, Mohsen?" I tapped my toe against the chipped tiles. "I have no idea what you're talking about, Ozzy June," he yawned. "Are you sure?" I slid closer to the desk. "Is this about the new Furugh?" The newspaper came down, revealing his iPad underneath. His eyes looked bloodshot, eyelids drooping like a hound dog's. He must have been smoking already, and it wasn't even 11 in the morning. This place was so dysfunctional. "We're not replacing you, sweetheart," he said. You're doing such a good job that people wanted to see more Furuk, that's all. He put his legs up on the desk, placed his fingers behind his head. Then why didn't you tell me? I'm sorry, honey. You know how busy it gets around here. It slipped my mind. He took a bite of the kotlet sandwich. A couple of crumbs lingered at the corner of his mouth. I left Mohsen to his weed and video games and closed the door on my way out at his request. Outside, I stood in the shade of an acacia tree, looked for Nima, the handsome engineering student who hung out at the park with his friends some days. He and I had eye-flirted once or twice, and I'd had dreams about Nima all week. Dreams where he took apart the music box my grandmother had given me and showed me how to put it all back together in the dark. I smoked and thought about what it would be like to be in a real Iran. By the end of summer, I'd have enough saved for a plane ticket to Tehran, where I'd still never been. Not that Mom would let me go anyway. She was such a tyrant. Mom and I lived in Sugarland, a big dull suburb outside Houston. Mom moved us there from Tehran when I was 3 to escape my dad and his other family. She chose Sugarland for its diversity and because she liked the name. It sounded like a theme park made of candy. Why didn't we move to California? I asked Mom whenever we watched Iranian music videos on satellite TV. Only rich Iranians moved to California, was all she ever said. My dad still lived in Iran. I'd only met him once that I remembered, back when I was 10. He wore a mustache whose ends glistened red in the sun and brought me a huge bag full of sour fruit roll-ups that I ate until I threw up. Sometimes I'd lie awake and think about his 2 other daughters, if they looked like me, if they wondered about me, if they wanted to be me. But they didn't know I existed. I'd always been my father's secret, while their imagined lives unfolded in bright colors like a movie behind my eyes. I heard a familiar voice and looked up to see Furuk too standing with Nima near the fountain behind the entrance. He was sitting on the ledge and splashing her with water, laughing as she squealed with her hands held in front of her face, fingers splayed, eyes squeezed shut. With her wig on, she looked exactly like a photo of Furuk I'd found on some Iranian girl's blog the summer I got this job. It was from the early 1960s, a few years before Furuk died, and must have been taken during one of her rare happy periods. She glowed as if she'd swallowed a jar of fireflies. I watched as she leaned on one arm toward Nima, her head cocked to one side. She said something with a faux shy smile, and he laughed and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. Then he said something she must not have liked because she punched his shoulder, but she'd struck him so weakly that his body didn't budge. They both laughed, and he splashed her with water again, soaking her thin shirt so that it stuck to her skin. Being a fan of all 3 Godfather films, I knew I had to keep Furuk too close. I made her kotlet sandwiches one day and brought them to the park in a basket. At lunchtime, I found her on the terrace of her flat, writing in her notebook with a pink pen. "What do you want?" She didn't look up. I held the basket up like a peace offering. "I made kotlet sandwiches," I told her in my sweetest voice. "I thought we could have a picnic in the park in Shiraz." She looked at the basket and then at me. "You made me lunch?" Her jaw relaxed. I nodded. She eyed the basket as if it were full of snakes. "I'm not eating carbs," she said. "There's also salad." I held up a container of chopped tomatoes and cucumbers and lime dressing. Her smile was so subtle I might have missed it had I not memorized the mechanics of the real Furuk's face. At the park we ate in silence, watching as couples picnicked around us, laying out their blankets on the dried up grass and sitting with their shoulders touching beneath the trees. "Do you like working here?" she asked me, scooping up the last bite of the salad. "It's all right. Better than working at a fast food chain or the mall." I pulled out a clump of grass and arranged the leaves across my skirt in a neat row. She nodded like she'd had experience with both. "Don't you think it's kind of weird, this place?" I shrugged. "It's Texas." She laughed like this was the funniest thing she'd ever heard. She asked if I liked movies, and when I said yes, invited me to watch a Furuk film with her at her house later that night. Furuk, too, whose real name was Nina, lived with her uncle and aunt in Montrose in a little blue house that looked real Texan on the outside, with bright pink shutters and a wraparound porch, and Iranian on the inside, with white leather couches and a big red Persian carpet in the foyer. We sat on the floor of her tiny bedroom, with our backs against the wall, watching the movie on her laptop. The House is Black, Furuk's Leper Colony film, was just as sad this time as the other 8 times I watched it. We both wiped tears with the sleeves of our Furuk shirts. "Imagine being so multi-talented," Nina said, turning off the film. so full of ideas and visions. That wasn't something I could imagine, but I didn't say as much. "What do you want to do with your life?" she asked. I hesitated, playing with the hem of my skirt. "I don't know yet." She snatched the wig from my head. "You can't be Furuk forever." She smiled, the firefly look returning to her face. I laughed and pulled the wig away from her, a few of the hairs coming loose in my hands. But a feeling of uneasiness spread across my collarbone like a rash. For so long, I hadn't thought of myself as anything else. The day after my lunch with Furuk II, I couldn't focus on my job. The park looked small and drab, and it made me sad to walk through its fake cobblestone streets or greet visitors pretending to be someone else. I rode my bike around all day, gliding past Tajush Bozar, where women with the same caterpillar eyebrows and wavy black hair as my mom sorted through bins of cheap silver and turquoise jewelry. I rode past Hafez's tomb in Shiraz, up to the Persepolis lookout point, where you could climb up to the fake ruins and see the whole ugly city laid out underneath you. I needed to be somewhere open, somewhere I could breathe freely and be alone with my thoughts. The wind... Sorry, supposed to bridge that part. When I got to the top of the lookout, I saw him. The familiar profile, the angular jaw. It was Nima, standing next to one of those famous old horses you see in postcards from Shiraz. He leaned his head against the horse's head, as if the horse were his, as if he'd ridden the beast all the way up here. A sign behind him said, "Please don't lean on the horses, they're fragile." But Nima's lean didn't perturb the horses. It looked like they were leaning on him. Normally, if I liked a guy, I gave him presents. I'd pick a flowering pomegranate from Mom's yard and present it to him on a plate, or slip a soft piece of nougat and pistachios wrapped in plastic into his palm. But I had nothing for Nima but Furuk herself. I found myself clearing my throat. "Everyone knows," I said, quoting her sexiest love poem, my words flat and careful, taut as new skin. Nima swiveled around. "Everyone knows that you and I have seen the garden." A smirk winked at the corners of his mouth. My voice shook and I struggled for breath, but I could see a quiet glow light up his eyes from behind, like the beginnings of a warm feeling rising, trembling through the darkness of his pupils. As I got to the end of the poem, my voice sounded strange and distant, like the words were invaders spilling from my throat into new territory, foreign bodies launching an immune reaction. Sweat trickled down my temples, the lining of the wig felt warm and heavy with damp. I'd never done anything like this for a boy. I'd never stepped into another person this way, never took over someone else's life so completely. Nima didn't say anything until I got to the last word. When it was over, he clapped and then stood close to me, whispered "very nice" into my ear. I could feel his cologne burn through my nostrils. I imagined its molecules seeping into my brain cells, slowing them down until they were knocking into each other. I leaned into Nima and kissed his mouth. He tasted like mortadella, the good kind my mother brought back from the deli on special occasions. I slid my hand across his button-down shirt, stiff and starched in some places, softer in others. His tongue was hesitant, pausing and moving and pausing again. But then he grabbed both of my shoulders and pulled me down to the ground. He hiked up my skirt, his hand moving between my legs the way it had in my dream about the music box. I closed my eyes and imagined white mountains stretched around us, like in images of Tehran in winter. I pictured flat roofs and satellite dishes, the somber honking of horns, the choking burn of smog. I saw the real Furuk sitting on a rooftop, smoking a long cigarette and flipping idly through a slender book. She looked bored and lonely, as if waiting for someone she didn't really want to see, and then she burst suddenly into tears. We walked on the dirt, and I tried moving to the rhythm of Furuk's poems with varying degrees of success. A pebble dug into my back, leaving a pink indentation I'd later discovered resembled the state of Utah. There was a rustling nearby, but before I could see what it was, Nima jerked forward with a grunt. The words of Furuk's poems tapered off like a record that had come to a sudden halt. The rustling stopped. Afterwards, he brushed the dirt off his shirt and kissed me on the cheek, his stubble scratching my face. I waited for him to leave, then straightened my skirt and brushed off the bits of dirt and little pebbles that stuck to my knees. At the park the next day, I could feel men look at me differently everywhere I went. The bookstore, the bazaar, the bridges in Isfahan, as if they sensed something had changed in me. They slowed when I walked by, smiled like they were lighting candles with their eyes. I ignored the men and rode around the park, looking for Nima. a basket of cutlet sandwiches dangling from my handlebars. I found him on the Taste of Cherry ride, driving around with Shireen. On a big projector screen behind them, scenes played from the famous Kiarostami movie, while they drove around a light-up model of Tehran in a green Paycon. He had his arm around her shoulders. My head felt hot. I got back on my bike and left. Mina was standing by the Azadi monument, talking to visitors who just arrived. I walked up to her, the basket still in my hands. "Do you want to have another picnic?" I swung the basket in her direction. At first, I thought she didn't hear me. She kept on greeting and laughing as if I weren't there. "Mina," I yelled over the din around us. When she finally looked at me, it was as if we'd never met, her eyes as opaque as the ocean at night. "I'm working," she said. I felt a tug and looked down just as Babak pulled the basket from my hands. I chased him all the way to the train station again. We wrestled on the platform, knocking the sandwiches onto the tracks. That's when he pulled out his phone and showed me the video of me and Nima on the lookout point, Nima gliding over me. I didn't wait for Mohsen to find and fire me. I gathered my things from the employee locker and left. The park was teeming with a new crowd of people by the time I started biking to my car, mostly Arab and Indian men from the oil and gas plants, along with a few white stragglers who'd come here for the nightly belly dancing and cocktail hour at the Arabian Nights Lounge. I pedaled faster as I approached Esfahan, flying across the bridges. A breeze blew in and twisted together all the different smells, the kebabs and the tea, the hookah smoke and the jasmine vines. Soon the park was completely dark and the lamps lit up one by one along the cobblestone streets. From afar I could see the spirals of 1979, roller coaster revolution, stretching up into the clouds, a big movie screen behind it flashing clips of real footage from the revolution. The passengers rode in carts shaped like open newspapers, with headlines from the weeks before and after the revolution painted on the sides in English and Persian. I heard the faint rise and fall of screaming as the roller coaster looped around. The line was short and moved quickly. I climbed into the first open newspaper and sat next to a goth boy wearing black lipstick. He acknowledged my presence with an anemic nod. As the ride jolted to a start, I wrapped my fingers tightly around the safety bar. A male speaker narrated the revolution's early days in a booming, accented voice as we climbed to the top of the spiral. The first big street protests, the hundreds arrested, all the people who'd been executed, who'd sacrificed their lives. I'd heard other versions of the same story all my life, the same narrative of hope and loss over and over. The stories never changed. This time, the story didn't move me. I didn't cry at the images of people shouting in the street. Their actions seemed less like a sacrifice than simply a moment of friction that had burst unexpectedly into flame. Looking down at the park from above, I wondered if someday an Iranian who'd grown up here would make a smaller replica of Ayatollah Land, and if someone from the next generation would make a replica of that replica, if the place would be recreated until it was tiny enough to fit on a shelf in someone's house, next to other trinkets collected and held behind glass. And as we reached the very top of the roller coaster, the people below us growing smaller and smaller, as protesters in Tehran shouted silent demands on the screen in front of us, another thought crept its way into my head. Maybe that's all the world was too, just a replica of some other place, someplace bigger and louder and more complicated, more vivid in smell and sound. And maybe in that other place lived other versions of us, the shadows of a brighter past, watching us spin along in space as their own world came crashing down.